Harkina was not a city built from stone, but from silence. Its towers rose crookedly like the fingers of blind gods, wrapped in black moss and murmured hymns, standing not to impress but to obey. It was a place where no birds nested, no laughter echoed, and no child was born without their future already whispered into the ears of the temple scribes. Harkina had been founded on prophecy, ruled by it, and kept alive only through the precise rhythm of ritual. There were no clocks, no councils, no winds to guide the harvest, only oracles and the truths they scraped from behind the veil. In the center of the city stood the Shade-Ward Temple, a monstrous structure of obsidian and bone-colored marble that seemed to devour light itself. Its walls were carved not with symbols of gods, but with grooves made from the fingernails of those who had begged to see. The temple had no windows, no doors in the ordinary sense. Its entrance was a mouth-shaped tunnel that opened only during eclipse, or when a ritual demanded new flesh. The people believed it was a living thing, and in many ways it was. It remembered every step taken within its halls. It murmured the names of the fallen when the wind passed over its spires. It was said that even the sun refused to look directly upon it. From dawn to dusk, the sky over the temple remained gray, no matter the season. The oracles of Harkina were not chosen by birthright or intellect, but by what they were willing to lose. Every oracle was marked not by what they saw, but by what they had given up to see more clearly. The ritual was called the veiling, and it took a piece of the body, sometimes a tongue, sometimes a hand, sometimes the sense of smell or the ability to sleep. But the most sacred offering, the one that earned a place in the inner sanctum of the Shade-Ward Temple, was the sacrifice of the eyes. Those who gave their sight were revered as pure seers. Their orbits were left hollow, marked only by pale silks wound over the sockets like prayers nodded in desperation. The city treated them with both awe and terror. Children were not permitted to speak in their presence. Merchants lowered their heads when passing them in the street. It was believed that when a pure seer turned their face toward you, they were not looking at your body, but at the web of your fate unraveling ahead. Each ritual had a purpose. To heal, to curse, to find missing things, to prevent floods, to predict which child would bear a dangerous dream. But they all required a cost. And over time, the city became addicted to the clarity that sacrifice brought. Harkina no longer trusted reason. It trusted only what could be bought with pain. The High Oracle, known only as Voice of Vault, had ruled the temple for longer than any could remember. His body was a tapestry of loss, tongueless, eyeless, limbless, fed and carried by attendants who claimed he spoke through breath alone. He had not stepped beyond the Shade-Ward walls in decades, and yet his whispers dictated every decision in Harkina. War or peace, execution or pardon, planting or famine, all awaited his signs. And he, in turn, awaited offerings. It was said that deep within the temple, there was a vault that held the eyes of every oracle who had ever served the city. The Vault of Vision. They were kept in crystal jars, suspended in salted oil, pulsing faintly with residual light. Some whispered that they still saw, each one reflecting a different possible world, and that Voice of Vault communed with them to chart the safest path for Harkina's future. Others believed the vault was not real at all, a myth to ensure obedience, to prevent doubt from ever taking root in the city's carefully tilled fear. But doubt was growing. Though the rituals continued, something had begun to fray. Prophecies delivered with certainty proved flawed. A predicted drought ended in floods. A child marked for greatness vanished. A war expected to last a day endured for months, and the soldiers returned with tales of being sent into death with blind guesses dressed up as visions. The city's faith held, but only just. And still the rituals continued. The altar was never dry. The oracles continued to offer their senses, bound by generations of reverence and threat. And above all, the eyes, always the eyes, remained the ultimate tithe. Children with unusual sight were watched closely. Anyone born with silver in their gaze, or who claimed to dream of futures not yet requested, were recorded and inspected. It was considered an honor to give one's sight for the city. An honor that few returned from. And always the Shade-Ward Temple waited. Its shadow stretching wider with each year. Its halls growing colder. Its vault hungrier. Nima was born in the blue hour before dawn, when the sky held its breath and the city of Harkina dozed in that brief, uneasy stillness between dreams and prophecy. The midwife who pulled her into the world gasped when she saw the girl's eyes. They were not black or brown or gray like the rest of the city. They were silver, deep, sharp silver like steel left to reflect moonlight too long. Not pale, not cloudy, not blind. Sure. Where? Watching. She did not cry when she was born. She only looked. And the lantern hanging in the corner of the room, burning with steady oil and prayer thread, dimmed to a trembling flicker. The midwife tried to relight it. The flames sputtered, danced once and died again. No wind. No breath. Just her gaze. Her mother, barely conscious, reached out and whispered her daughter's name. Not a prophecy name. Not a temple name. Just one she dreamed once when she was young and still hopeful. Nima*, which meant dusk in the old river tongue. A soft name. A forgotten word. A mistake, perhaps. Her father, a quiet stonemason, wrapped Nima in a cloth stitched with pine soot to keep bad spirits from noticing her glow. He avoided her eyes. Not out of fear but out of a kind of trembling awe. For the first few weeks they raised her in near darkness, feeding her in the hush of night, keeping their windows covered and their lamps low. They noticed strange things early. The way cats avoided her. The way ink bled on the page when she stared too long. How her shadow, even when still, seemed to flicker slightly, reaching a second longer than it should have. She did not laugh but she listened. She did not play but she watched. By the time she could walk, the rumors had already begun. Neighbors noticed the way birds refused to land near the family's roof. Children whispered about the girl with the mirror eyes who didn't blink. Once, a visiting trader's daughter pointed at Nima in the market and asked her name. Before anyone could answer, the trader fell to his knees and began to sob uncontrollably, crying out a name no one recognized. He could not explain it. He left the city before nightfall. Nima's mother stopped taking her out after that. They tried to keep her hidden. They moved between districts. They changed her name each time. But no matter where they went, someone always noticed. A flickering candle. A voice that slipped out before the mouth moved. A window cracking during sleep. And worst of all, her gaze. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't even intense. It was simply seeing in a way that made the skin crawl. The temple heard of her by the time she was 6. They sent the lowest rank first. A black-cloaked listener who stood at the door and asked polite questions about lineage and birth records. Her father lied. Her mother trembled. The listener said nothing but left a small copper disc nailed to their lintel. 3 nights later the seekers came. Not in silence but in ceremony. They came with slow drums and hollow bells, with a pale litter draped in shroud cloth. They came with 3 blindfolded oracles who each bore a different blade, bronze, bone, and silver. They came with scripts sealed in wax, bearing the decree of Voice of Vault himself. The girl was fate-born and thus subject to the ritual of sight. The ritual could not be denied. It was written in the old laws, in the rhythm of the city itself. No one defied the veiling. Those who tried vanished. Their names dissolved from stone, their houses collapsed in a single night. It was not only illegal, it was unthinkable. Nima's mother tried to hold her back. Her father wept and opened the door. Nima did not cry. She turned to them both, looked into their eyes for a long moment and whispered, "Don't try to follow me." They didn't know how to explain it later. She had never spoken before. The seekers dressed her in gray and led her barefoot through the city. The bells chimed in rhythm with her steps. The people watched from windows and behind shutters, murmuring old verses to protect themselves. Some made signs of mercy. Others of fear. One woman fell to her knees and began to chant in a forgotten tongue until her voice cracked. No one stopped her. The temple doors opened when Nima approached. Not at the command of priests. Not by mechanism or key. They opened because she arrived. The stone did not groan. It breathed. And as she stepped into the darkness beyond the altar, the last light of day dimmed behind her. Shadows stretched longer than they should have. The world sighed, and Nima, with her silver eyes and dusk-bound name, disappeared into the place where sight is not a gift but a price. There was no warmth in the chamber of the altar. No torches. No offerings of incense or honeyed bread like in the lesser rituals performed for fertility, rainfall, or mercy. The air inside the chamber was too still to breathe easily, and it smelled faintly of salt and something older, something like stone left to rot. The altar itself was a single slab of black granite veined with pale gray, as if the years had cracked it but never broken it. It rose from the floor without ornament, stained by hundreds of years of blood offerings, an eternal witness to the cost of knowledge. Nima stood before it, hands bound in the ceremonial fashion with threads soaked in moon oil. Her feet were bare and her robe thin, a shift of plain silk dyed with the ash of extinguished temple flames. Her hair had been cut blunt at the jaw and smeared with the crushed petals of dreamless lilies. She did not tremble. Her face held no fear. But her silver eyes were wide, and the chamber dimmed just slightly in their reflection. 3 oracles stood around her in a triangle. None had eyes. The sockets where sight had once lived were covered with finely woven cloth, soaked in oil and scripture. One carried a bowl. One held the ritual blade. The third, the eldest, held a crystal vial shaped like a tear suspended mid-fall. None of them spoke. Their breathing was timed to the rhythm of the drums sounding from far above. A slow, cavernous beat, echoing through the bones of the temple, striking down into the floor like a distant, patient heart. Nima said nothing. She had been instructed to remain silent, as all fate-born were. Her silver eyes flicked toward each oracle in turn, and they each bowed in unison when her gaze touched them. It was not reverence. It was reaction. Her sight pressed into them like heat pressing through fog, warping the air around it. Even without pupils they could feel it. Her gaze reached inside. The High Oracle did not attend the ritual. He never did. But his decree had come days before in the form of a sealed scroll wrapped in twine dyed with voice word. The message was clear and brief. Asterisk, she is too deep. Take the eyes, not the name. Asterisk, not the name. That meant she was not to be recorded in the Book of Offerings. Her name would not be etched into the vault wall, nor spoken during the recitation of sacrificial truths. To be unnamed after ritual was rare. It meant danger. It meant rejection. It meant the temple itself was afraid of her. The eldest oracle stepped forward. His hands were thin and ink-stained, shaking slightly not from age but from memory. He had performed this ritual only once before in his 72 years. The first time had broken his own voice. The blade he now held was bone, carved from the rib of the first pure seer, passed down through centuries, never cleaned, never sharpened, only fed. Nima tilted her face up. She blinked once. Then she closed her eyes. The first cut was silent. The blade passed across her right temple, precise and curved, tracing the shape of the eye socket in a single motion. Her skin opened like a door that had never been locked. She did not scream. Her breath held steady. The second cut, around the left, was slower. The shadows in the chamber quivered. One of the oracles began to hum. The old hum, the one used when too much power gathered in one place. The removal was surgical and slow. The eyes did not resist, but light dimmed as they left her face, as if they were not merely organs but anchors for reality itself. As each eye was placed into the crystal vial, it began to emit a faint silver light. No oracle had ever seen that before. The light curled in soft ribbons around the glass, tracing old symbols none could name. The vial pulsed in the hand of the bearer. He nearly dropped it. When it was done, Nima opened her mouth but made no sound. Her eye sockets bled in quiet, rhythmic lines, flowing not chaotically but in deliberate streams down her cheeks and onto her robes. The blood did not pool. It vanished into the stone beneath her feet, as if the altar itself drank it eagerly. The eldest oracle turned toward the wall where names were etched. He did not lift his chisel. The others did not ask why. Instead, they turned her gently, almost reverently, toward the long path that led away from the altar chamber and out into the corridor of discarded seers. It was a passage few spoke of and fewer returned from. Those who were considered too broken or too dangerous were sent through it, to emerge into the outskirts, where the temple's domain faded and silence reigned. She would not be followed. She would not be guarded. She would simply be forgotten. Before she vanished into the corridor, one of the younger temple scribes who had been hiding in a shadowed alcove, barely of age, eyes still wide with belief, whispered, "What do you see now?" Nima paused. She turned her head toward him, eyeless, blood-streaked, silent. And then she smiled. Not with cruelty. Not with pity. Just with a strange, weary knowing. "I see the part after the ending," she said, "where the truth is too big for language." Then she turned and walked into the dark. Behind her, the vial containing her eyes was sealed in the vault of vision, placed between two ancient offerings. The crystal refused to go dark. Even as the vault doors closed, her eyes kept glowing. And the other eyes around them began to flicker, some blinking, some bleeding light, as if remembering something they had been forbidden to see. The outskirts were where Harkina forgot itself. Beyond the temple's edge, past the holy stonework and the scripted walls, past the silver bells of penance and the road where offerings once paraded in blood, the city unspooled like an unraveling thread. There was no map of the outskirts. No census. No offerings. Only the broken, the quiet, the left behind. The streetlights stopped before reaching it, and the temple drums did not echo there. Here the wind shifted strangely. Here, ash clung to footprints as if trying to remember who had passed. Nima arrived alone. She had no escort. No robes. No title. No name. The corridor of discarded seers led to a rusted gate that opened at her approach and sealed behind her with a noise like teeth grinding shut. The sun was low when she emerged, though she did not see it. Her face was bandaged roughly. Not by care but by temple ritual. To keep the silver from spilling into the world, they said. The cloth was soaked in salt. It stung. She said nothing. The world beyond the city was not wilderness, not yet. It was ruin. Old shrines forgotten by the temple. Homes swallowed by dust. Half-built statues meant to honor oracles that had been struck from the records. Stone paths broken by tree roots and time. And here and there people. Exiles. The sick. The once sacred. Children born with wrong-colored blood. Women who had spoken too many questions. Oracles whose prophecies had come too late. They saw her before she saw them. A girl with bandaged eyes, walking slowly, unshaking as though following a rhythm no one else could hear. Her hands stayed loose at her sides. Her feet avoided broken glass, uneven stone, thorn root. She did not fumble. She did not trip. She moved with the kind of stillness that makes even birds hold their breath. The first to speak to her was a boy named Mevrin, who had once been a temple drummer before his right hand burned during a thunder ritual. He had been cast out with a smile and no apology, and now he fashioned hollow drums from sewer shells and beat rhythms for the exiled to follow during fog. He watched Nima from the roof of an old bathhouse, tapping out curiosity into the stone. She paused below him, turned her face up and said, I like the beat, but it's missing something. He asked what? She said, an echo. That was how she was taken in, not adopted, not protected, just welcomed. No one asked her name. Names were fragile here, like mirrors half buried in sand. She became simply the girl with hollow sight. She slept in the corner of a ruined temple where the rain whispered in tongues long unspoken. She drank from the cracked mouths of statues. She ate what was shared and spoke when spoken to. She did not dream. But she listened. She listened to wind and to silence. She listened to insects hiding beneath moss. She listened to breath. She listened to the memory of footsteps still trapped in stone. Her body, even blind, learned to notice. How long shadows took to cool. What certain birds sounded like before dust storms. When people were lying not by their words but by the way they chewed between them. Over time she learned to move not like the sighted and not like the blind, but like something else. She did not reach or flinch. She simply knew. The bandages remained over her sockets, but some began to say that if you stood too close, you could feel heat radiating from them. Not fire. Something older. Like the pulse beneath the earth's skin. Like the heat behind closed eyes before a vision. The outskirts changed around her. They did not become beautiful. But strange things began to happen. A broken statue that had wept blood for 50 years dried up the night she slept beside it. A woman who had not spoken in 12 years opened her mouth when Nima passed and whispered a single word, wait. A beggar boy who had never been taught numbers began counting stars backward. And the wind, always erratic, always strange, began to hum softly through the cracks in walls when she sat still for too long, repeating syllables no one had taught it. The people did not worship her. They had lived too long with disappointment. But they watched. And they remembered. And when strange things happened, they wrote them down in chalk on walls where only the exiled walked. Nima does not sleep beneath the full moon. Nima touches stone and it remembers pain. Nima bleeds silver when she listens too hard. She heard these things and said nothing. Sometimes her sockets burned. Not with pain, pain would have been easier, but with a pressure that had no direction. As if the world were trying to flood back into her head through the places the temple had emptied. She would sit still for hours, her fingers pressed against the dirt, her spine trembling as if struck by distant thunder. She never called it sight. It was not sight. It was not hearing. It was something in between and beyond. There were no dreams. Dreams had left her. What came now were echoes. Not visions of the future, like the oracles pretended to see, but reverberations of truth too wide to be held in one moment. She heard footsteps from centuries ago. She felt grief still trapped in walls. Once she stood in a burned field and saw, not with eyes but with knowing, the shapes of children playing long before flame touched the grass. She did not weep. The echoes did that for her. One evening, she stood before a tree that had grown in the ribs of a collapsed god statue. The birds had fled the canopy, though no one knew why. Nima tilted her face toward the sky, then turned slowly as if hearing a clock the rest of them had forgotten. She said, something is moving. The others asked what. She replied, not a person. A memory that's trying to become a storm. They didn't understand but they listened. She waited. That was the part no one understood, not even Mevrin who had become her closest shadow. Nima was always waiting. For what, she never said. But the days did not matter to her. The shifts in light, the seasons, the stories that passed like illness among the exiled, none of it touched her the way the echoes did. She walked each path as if retracing steps not yet taken. She sat in ruins as if guarding something no one had buried. She listened always to the silence between things. And the silence, patient as it was, began to hum back. Then one night she opened her mouth and said, "It's time." And the wind shifted. The ruins held their breath. Somewhere deep in the stone a crack widened. And far above, in the city of blind oracles and broken prophecy, the vault of vision flickered. Her eyes, sealed in crystal, began to pulse again. The echo had found its voice. And Nima, waiting in the hollow between sight and silence, turned toward what even the gods refused to see. It began with a feather. A single black one, sharp and sleek, laying across the threshold of the abandoned bathhouse where Nima slept. Mevrin found it before dawn and held it up to the wind, suspicious. There had been no birds near the ruins for years, especially not crows, which the outskirts called the last omen. Crows were said to be drawn only to what couldn't be forgotten, to the places that even the silence wouldn't bury. When they returned, it meant something wanted to be seen again. By the time Nima stirred from her listening sleep, the bathhouse roof was full of them. Dozens, perhaps hundreds. Black eyes, unblinking. Feathers sleek and still. No flapping, no cawing. Just presence. Like sentinels. Like witnesses. Mevrin stood outside with a rusted blade in one hand, fear tightening the lines in his face. Others gathered quietly, whispering behind broken pillars. None approached. Nima rose as if summoned. She walked barefoot through the cracked tile and stopped at the doorway, the morning light catching on the bloodless cloth that still bound her empty eyes. She tilted her head toward the crows. Not with surprise. With acknowledgement. She stepped outside and they did not scatter. One of them, a large one, its beak chipped and eyes dull as river stones, hopped forward and dropped something at her feet. A bone. Smooth. Human. The murmurs from the onlookers sharpened. Mevrin stepped closer. Is that? Nima knelt. Her fingers moved slowly, reverently, tracing the worn groove of the bone as if it were a prayer carved in silence. When she touched it, her body stiffened. Her breath caught. Then slowly she exhaled, not with effort, but as if something inside her had been waiting for release. She did not speak. She simply stood. And behind her, the rest of the crows began to move. One by one they flew down, each carrying something. Not meat. Not twigs. Not what birds were meant to bring. These were objects of the forgotten. Scrolls singed at the edges, fragments of masks once worn by ritual dancers, mirror shards dull with temple dust, bone fragments etched with whisper script. Things that should have been burned or buried or sealed in vaults no longer spoken of. They dropped them around her feet like offerings. Like tribute. Like memories returning home. Nima touched each in turn. With each object, her hands trembled differently. The scroll, a name erased but not forgotten. The mirror shard, an image of a priest striking a child behind an altar. A jawbone still humming with a woman's final scream. She didn't see these things. Not in the way others meant when they spoke of visions. She knew them. They unspooled inside her like smoke unraveling from a closed fist. Full and unescapable. What are they? Mevrin asked. Truths, she said. Truths no one buried deep enough. From that day forward, the crows followed her. They perched on rooftops, on shoulders of crumbling statues, on the rims of broken wells. They flew above her when she walked. They waited near her when she slept. Wherever she went, the air began to shift. The wind no longer wandered, it listened. The earth beneath her steps sometimes whispered names. And the objects kept coming. More scrolls. More bones. A bloodied temple cloth with a symbol that had been banned since the first flood. A child's doll carved with a tongue instead of a face. The outcasts who lived in the edges watched in wary awe, not sure whether to bless her or fear her. She had become something more than a girl. More than an oracle. She was memory incarnate. A vessel for things that should have stayed hidden. She built no shrine. She wrote no scripture. But slowly the ruins around her transformed. The old bathhouse became a vault of knowing. The broken tiles were covered in symbols and drawings made not by hand, but by crow's feet, dragging ash and bone dust into circles only she seemed to understand. When she walked among them, her footsteps matched the pattern. Always. As if she wasn't stepping forward, but retracing something already written. One night, Mevrin brought her a question. They're saying, he began, kneeling beside where she sat surrounded by feathers and flickering candles made of melted wax teeth, that what you're doing is dangerous. That the temple might come. Nima didn't answer right away. Instead, she held out her hand. A crow landed gently on her wrist, dropping a fragment of dark crystal, smooth on one side, jagged on the other. She held it to her bandaged sockets. The cloth did not part, but the air shivered. In her voice, hollow and full, she said, "They already are. In their dreams." And it was true. That same night, in the Shade Ward temple far above, 3 oracles awoke screaming. They babbled nonsense, blood pouring from their mouths. The High Oracle's crystal staff cracked. The vault of vision glowed a faint silver. The eyes of Nema, sealed in their twin crystal tear flasks, pulsed like stars on the verge of collapse. The priests gathered, whispering of corruption, of breach. They sent dream thieves and breath sniffers to the edges of the temple to see if any curse had been released. But none returned. Only crows followed them back, perching silently above the high windows, watching. Nema sat among ruins and feathers, her head tilted. The objects around her began to hum. Not with sound, with meaning. When she touched a scroll, she could tell if it was written under threat. When she held a bone, she knew how it had been broken. One mirror shard showed her the last face it reflected, a child weeping behind a temple veil. Another, when pressed against her skin, whispered names of those buried without rites. She didn't call this prophecy. She called it remembering. And remembering became power. Those who had been silenced began to come to her. Mute children who spoke only in echo, women who remembered their tongues being stolen, men whose blood had once been poured into sacred troughs and called blessing. They came with broken voices and trembling hands. She didn't ask for devotion, only for truth. They brought it, in song, in ashes, in bones. Each truth awakened another in her. She began to speak in riddles not of the future, but of the hidden. She recited prayers never taught. She told a blind man where his daughter's bones had been ground into pigment for temple murals. She whispered to a dying woman the real name of the child the priest had taken for ritual. His name had been written backwards in the temple book to hide his fate. The people no longer feared her. They followed. And the crows? They grew bolder. One entered the Shade Ward temple itself and dropped a bone fragment on the High Oracle's pillow. The rip, carved with a single word, *return. He ordered it burned. It did not catch fire. It cracked the hearth in half. Meanwhile, Nema stood in the hollow where gods had once been sculpted and listened to the sky. She touched the newest offering, a small cloth, white with temple lace, stained faintly with silver. When her fingers brushed it, she said, "My eyes are not where they left them." The crows cawed for the first time in weeks. And the vault of vision began to crack. In Harkina, the walls of certainty had always been stone-thick and silver-bound. The Shade Ward temple stood at the highest point in the city, as if it alone could speak directly to the stars. And for centuries the oracles, eyeless, earless, tongueless, had given truths so precise, so costly, that kings and beggars alike bowed before them. But something was unraveling. It began not with thunder but with a whisper that wouldn't stop. A low, gnat-thin hum, just below hearing, that disturbed the eldest oracle during his nightly silence immersion. At first he dismissed it as the ache of age or a dream lingering too long. But it followed him. Into the prayer chamber. Into sleep. Into waking. Then came the contradictions. 3 oracles gave readings on the same hour of the same day. One predicted flood. One fire. One peace everlasting. The ritual scribes argued over the correct transcription. The High Oracle slapped the table and ordered them all burned. But even he could feel the tremble under the marble, like a breath held too long beneath the foundation. The temple's vault, the vault of vision where the most sacred and dangerous senses were sealed in crystal, was supposed to be airtight, soundless, sealed with 9 wards and a blood oath. It began to glow. Not a warm glow of holiness. Not the golden sheen of divine favor. No, it was a silver pulse. Slow, rhythmic, measured. As if something inside had found its beat again. As if 2 eyes, long plucked and forgotten, had begun to look back. And worse, some of the other crystals, the ones containing ancient offerings, began to fracture. It started with a tongue sealed in a sliver of sanctified glass. The crystal cracked lengthwise, then began to bleed, not red but black like oil. The priest assigned to clean the vault fainted and woke screaming in a tongue no one had spoken in 500 years. His mouth was sewn shut that same night. Next, a pair of ears gifted by a prince centuries ago. Each one throbbed visibly within their prisms, and during ritual chanting, they echoed words that hadn't been said aloud. The sound was recorded and studied. The words were traced and traced again. The final translation, shivering and reluctant, spelled, "She is hearing now." She who, the High Oracle demanded, though he already knew. Nima's name was not supposed to be spoken. She had been declared seerless, her identity erased from the temple record, her memory outlawed. But still the priests gathered in hushed rooms behind locked doors and said it. Not with reverence but with fear. With awe. With a creeping realization that something sacred had been cast out that should have been worshipped. And it was returning. The temples closest to the Vault of Vision reported tremors. The floors pulsed at odd hours. Mirrors fogged from within. And the silver light in the vault? It did not fade. It grew stronger with each passing night. No longer a pulse. A burn. A presence. One night, an apprentice scribe dared to put her hand to the vault door. It was cold. Then burning hot. Then cold again. Her palm blistered in the shape of two open eyes. That same night, 5 oracles screamed simultaneously during a water reading. They clawed at their bandages. One tore hers off. The eye sockets were empty as expected, but blood poured down her cheeks like a river of molten silver. "She sees everything," she shrieked. "She sees what we buried." A cleansing ritual was held the next morning. The High Oracle struck the cleansing bell with all his strength. It cracked in two. When the choir began the hymn of unknowing, a sacred chant meant to silence cursed echoes, their voices split and stuttered. Some sang forward, others backward. The sound collapsed in on itself. None could finish the hymn. And so, the priests did what they always did when the unknown knocked. They tried to contain it. They doubled the guards near the vault. They rewrote wards. They burned older scrolls. They brought in a dream cutter from the Salt Coast, a man known to end visions mid-birth. He touched the vault and went blind instantly, not in the eyes but in the mind. He began muttering nursery songs that none remembered teaching him. He died that evening, smiling. The panic spread quietly. The temple's power rested on its clarity, its absolute access to truth. But now truth was cracking, bleeding, contradicting itself. The prophets murmured of a vision break, an unraveling of sacred rhythm. They called emergency conclaves. They whispered of closing the vault permanently. But it was already too late. In the darkest hour of night, when even stars hesitated over the temple dome, the twin crystal flasks containing Nima's eyes flared once, and then blinked. A movement no crystal should know. A silent crack split the altar stone. And somewhere far beyond the temple, in the ruins of the outskirts, Nima tilted her face toward the east. She did not smile. But her sockets burned silver beneath their bandages. She whispered only one word, "Ready." She did not announce her return. The sky did. Dark at noon. Silver-veined clouds stretched above the temple spires like tendrils reaching downward instead of up. No thunder. No rain. Only a silence so heavy even the wind dared not break it. Then came the sound of wings. Hundreds. Maybe thousands. Crows poured across the sky in a slow, circling descent, their shadows strobing over the city's gold domes and bleached sandstone towers. Some perched atop statues. Others on balconies. Some simply hovered, still as the moment before an oracle speaks. Harkina had not seen a single crow in over a century. Now they nested on the shade-ward walls like sentinels. And at their center, below them, walking between the split stones of the old East Road, came Nima. Her robes were the color of scorched ash, frayed at the hem, dusted with pollen and soot. Her bandages remained, though thin now, worn nearly translucent where her sockets pulsed beneath them. The silver glow did not flicker, it radiated. Not bright, not blinding, but constant, unarguable. At her left walked Mevrin, bearing a drum carved from a forgotten shrine, its stretched skin inked with old names. At her right walked a woman once sacrificed to silence, who now sang in tones the ear could not hear but the soul could. Behind her came dozens, maybe more. Not soldiers. Not rebels. Outcasts. Unnamed, uncounted. Children of discarded prophecy. Parents of cursed children. Former priests. Old seers. Midwives who had seen too much. They did not chant. They did not raise banners. They simply walked. And the city watched. People pressed to their windows, drawn by the weight in the air. Merchants forgot to haggle. Dancers stopped mid-step. Even the guards stationed at the eastern gate did not raise their weapons when they saw her. But the city, its stones, its long memory bones, reacted. As Nima approached, the ground split in thin, deliberate lines beneath her bare feet. Cracks spiderwebbed through the paved road, weaving around old temple carvings long believed erased. Not destruction. Revelation. Truths breaking the surface like seeds no one had known were planted. One crack ran straight up a statue of the first oracle and split its blindfold clean down the middle. Another broke open a long-covered nameplate at the city's old well, revealing a line etched in silver script. "Seerless is not sightless." The temple bells began to toll. Not in ritual rhythm. In panic. The guards at the inner gate finally moved, too late. They tried to bar the road, to slam the iron doors. But the hinges screamed. Stone twisted. The road shifted. Columns cracked. One fell before them like a kneeling giant, splitting the gate apart. Nima did not break stride. She passed through the gate as if it were smoke. The wind trailed behind her like a breath caught too long. The air around her shimmered, not with heat but with presence. A vibration not heard but understood. Like memory refusing to stay buried. Inside the Shade Ward temple, priests scrambled to gather relics. Some chanted loss-warding hymns. Others carved silence marks into the floor with shaking hands. None dared speak her name. It had been struck from record. Forbidden to pass the lips of holy men. But the temple itself whispered it. From statues. From water basins. From the lips of old oracles lost to thought. "Nima. Nima. She sees us still." Then the dead began to murmur. Not from graves but from places. From altar stones worn smooth by centuries. From cracked mosaics. From mirrors that once refused to reflect. Their voices poured out like breath long held, names and wrongs tumbling into the open. The Shade Ward walls wept silver streaks. And Nima stood at the base of the temple stairs. A priest stepped forward, voice trembling with borrowed courage. "You have no place here. You were cast out. You were." She raised her hand. He froze. Her voice, when it came, did not echo in the ears. It vibrated in the marrow. "I was not cast out. You were cast down. I carried truth while you buried it." He fell to his knees. The stairs rose before her, dozens of steps carved from holy silence. No one climbed them without permission. Not even kings. But as she stepped onto the first, the steps shuddered. The symbols carved into them flared silver, then reversed. Centuries of scripture unraveling backward, their false meanings peeled away. The stairs did not resist her. As she climbed, she no longer needed the bandages. They loosened. Then drifted away, caught by no wind, as if the air itself laid them gently down. Where her eyes had been, there was only light. Not blinding. Not empty. But vast. The kind of light that made shadows whisper in gratitude. The kind of light that didn't stop at vision but pierced time. She turned her face slightly and spoke. Not to the priests, not to the people, but to the temple itself. "I do not need your crystal cages. I do not need your robes or your riddles. I see what you refuse to see." She placed her hand against the great door of the inner sanctum. And the door opened itself. The doors opened not like gates but like wounds, slow, deliberate, ancient. The air behind them was colder than stone should allow, a breathless cold that had waited centuries for a witness. Light did not pour out. No golden beams. No divine blaze. Just a dimness, heavy and dull, as if the room itself was tired of pretending. Nima stepped through. The inner sanctum of the Shade Ward temple was where no foot had touched freely in over 300 years. It was not a hall. Not a chamber. It was a vault carved into the body of the mountain itself, veins of quartz and pyrite running through its skin like scars. No one outside the high oracle circle knew what it looked like. No drawings existed. No descriptions. Only myths. She walked its path without hesitation. The crows remained at the threshold. Her followers knelt outside. Even Mevrin, who had walked beside her every step since the outskirts, remained just beyond the door. She needed no guide here. The stone remembered her. Each step took her deeper into the lie. First came the Hall of Offerings. Long shelves lined with glass vessels, thousands. Eyes, ears, tongues, skin, sometimes whole hands. Each sense, each limb, preserved in crystal or wax or oil. Some twitched faintly. Others vibrated like faint echoes. Each one pulsed not with holiness but with drainage. They weren't relics, they were batteries. And as she passed them, many flickered and dimmed. She paused before a sealed flask that held a set of silver-flecked irises floating in thick amber. Her own. The glass shook as she neared it. Not from movement, but from recognition. The twin spheres within turned, slowly, until both stared outward. A pulse throbbed in the liquid. Nima did not reach for them. Instead, she turned toward the next hall. The chamber of the chain writings. Where the sacred texts were kept, carved into long strips of metal, chained to the walls. These were the verses the oracles chanted. The laws of rhythm. The sacred cycles. It was said that the gods themselves had breathed these truths into the mouths of the first seers. But as Nema passed, the chains unraveled. Scroll after scroll clattered to the floor. The metal plates slid free from their locks, revealing reverse texts, originals buried beneath amendments. Verses overwritten. Names erased. The words beneath were older, sharper. Unflinching. She knelt to read one. Asterisk, the gods do not demand the senses. They feed from them. Asterisk, another. Asterisk, the seerless see most clearly. Silence is the bone of truth. Asterisk, another. Asterisk, sight taken is sight enslaved. Asterisk, a final plate, scorched along the edges read. Asterisk, when the unseen returns, the house of false light shall burn from within. Asterisk, Nema stood. Her hands did not tremble. Her eyes burned beneath her skin, pulsing silver into the walls. She walked forward. Then came the core. The throne of radiant echoes. This was where the high oracle reigned, where prophecies were filtered and declared holy or profane. The room was vast, circular, domed without corners. The walls glowed faintly with embedded crystal veins. But at its center was no throne. No seat. Only a basin. Shallow. What? Filled not with water but with light. Not the kind that shone. It writhed. It was the same false light that filled the temple halls, the light that licked the stained glass windows and lit the altars during rituals. But here at the source Nema could feel it. It tugged at her bones. It tried to enter her through her breath. She stood just short of its edge and finally understood. The city's glory had never come from divine favor. It came from this basin. And this basin fed on what was stolen. Each eye, each tongue, each hand. Every ritual of offering was a feeding. Not of gods, but of something older. Something hidden. Something that had taught the first priests how to cut and preserve and rebrand hunger as holiness. She turned slowly, and the high oracle was there. He wore no robes of glory. Only black cloth, heavy with gold dust. His eyes were long gone, 2 polished stones sealed over the sockets. His mouth was smeared with ritual dye. He stood on the steps above the basin, arms raised. You should not be here, he said. His voice rang out in 3 tones. One old, one young, one female. Nema's head tilted. Her own voice came calm. Whose voice are you borrowing now? He stepped down, slowly. His face did not move like flesh, it moved like wax, as if shaped daily, maintained. Behind the stones of his eyes, something pulsed. You were discarded. Your gift was rejected. You were unfit for divine knowing. No, she said, stepping toward the basin. You are unfit for truth. And truth does not wait forever. You cannot speak for the gods. There are no gods here, she said, gesturing toward the writhing basin. Only thirst. He opened his mouth to retort, but the voices tangled. His throat spasmed. A scream tried to escape, but it sounded like a chorus torn in half. Nema walked closer. The basin stirred, and for the first time she saw them. The things beneath the light. Not faces. Not forms. But presences. Shadows with hunger. Echoes made flesh. The source of prophecy was not divine insight. It was fed memory. Stolen sensations. Truths wrung from suffering. The gods of Harkina were not givers. They were parasites. You built your empire on sacrifice, she said to the high oracle. You sold the pain of children as prophecy. You called silence sacred so no one would scream. You do not understand, he rasped. No, she said, I remember. The walls trembled. The crystals embedded in the ceiling flickered and went black. Nema raised her hand, and every crow perched outside the temple cawed once, loud enough to fracture glass. And the basin began to drain. Not physically. Not visibly. But its pull weakened. Its hunger thinned. The thrumming of trapped senses faltered. No, the high oracle said, stumbling forward. You'll doom us. You'll undo centuries. Nema turned to him. You were never building truth. Only walls. And I walked through them. She stepped into the basin. The light recoiled. It hissed. It pulsed, faster, erratic. It reached for her, tried to tether, to siphon, to consume. But she burned brighter. No eyes. No mouth. No name. Only memory made whole. And the basin cracked. A hairline split, then a fracture. The entire sanctum shook. The scrolls fell from their chains. The preserved senses shattered in their flasks. The altar groaned. The high oracle screamed, and the voices left him. Each fled his throat in a different direction, shrieking like freed ghosts. He collapsed, hands over his ears, mouth open in a voiceless scream. And Nima, standing in the wreck of what once had been a god's cradle, spoke a final word. Truth. And the mountain answered. The path to the vault was not guarded. Not anymore. Its doors stood ajar as though the stone itself had grown weary of secrets. As though every lock had sighed open in resignation. There was no resistance. No priests waiting to stop her. Only the silence of a sacred place unmasked. Nima stepped inside. The vault of the senses, deepest chamber of the Shade Ward Temple, carved from the base of the mountain, was colder than any breath she had known. The air tasted of copper, salt, and regret. It was circular, windowless, impossibly vast. The walls rose high into darkness, lined with endless crystal shelves that shimmered faintly in unnatural light. And within them, sealed in glass, floated the offerings, thousands upon thousands of preserved senses. Eyes blinked in sleep. Ears twitched with echoes of sound they could no longer chase. Tongues curled and uncurled like beasts dreaming of speech. The vault was not still. It breathed, pulsed, hummed with hunger that had been named holiness for too long. Nima moved slowly, each footfall matching the rhythm of a world unmaking itself. She passed rows of eyes, some cloudy with age, others sharp and silver, some still glimmering with the last thing they had seen. Many of them twitched as she neared. Several turned to face her, pulsing within their prisons. She could feel them recognizing her, not from memory but from return. Whispers flooded the room, though no mouths moved. The whispers came from the senses themselves, stolen and suspended like fruit pickled in fear. They did not speak language. They spoke sensation, grief, terror, love taken too early, pain carved beneath songs of devotion. And they reached for her, not with limbs but with need. Not pleading. Not begging. Just waiting. The vault had become a graveyard for sacred theft. She stepped into its center. There, rising from the floor, stood the heart of it all. A crystal spire as tall as 3 men, its core dense with fused offerings, entire bundles of sense sealed together like clustered organs. The High Oracle had called it the axis of knowing. The priests worshipped it as the source of all prophecy. To Nima, it pulsed like a wound that refused to close. She stood before it silent. Then she breathed. What? A slow, deep inhale. Not dramatic. Not forced. Just a breath drawn from a truth long held. And the vault responded. The air tightened. The light dimmed. The crystal spire groaned, a sound like ice cracking on a spring lake. Then she exhaled. And it shattered. Not with a thunderclap, but with a singing. A pure, bell-like tone rang out as the first fracture split the spire from crown to base. Then came the second. And the third. Cracks multiplied like lightning through glass. The crystal structure quivered, and then burst into light. 1,000 shelves splintered. Ice poured down like rain. Tongues fell like petals. Ears scattered like thrown seeds. And the sound that followed was not silence. It was a wail. A deep, full-bodied keening, ripped from the belly of a city that had never been allowed to speak its own suffering. The walls themselves sobbed. Pillars shook. Statues split. Bells shattered in their towers. And across Harkina people fell to their knees. Oracles collapsed mid-prophecy. Their mouths opened but no priestly chant emerged, only broken fragments of their original voices, buried under centuries of borrowed rhythms. Some gasped. Some screamed. Some wept in relief. In alleys, in shrines, in private prayer rooms, they felt the ache in their skulls stop. The echo released. The pressure gone. A girl who had been deaf since birth blinked, and heard her mother humming. An old man who had not spoken in 40 years coughed, then whispered the name of his dead wife. A child born blind laughed as she described a dream in vivid color. The temple burned from the inside. But the fire was not flame. It was light. It poured from Nima, not from her mouth, not from her hands, but from the place where her eyes had once been. A flood of silver radiance, so soft it left no burns, but so full it washed the shadows from every hidden corner. The darkness screamed. Not with malice, but with despair. It had been dethroned. Its disguise unmade. From that scream real voices emerged. A woman's whisper, "They took my tongue but I sang in sleep." A child's cry, "I saw them lie and no one believed me." A man's weeping, "They used my silence to speak their own truths." Voice after voice, some long dead, some newly freed, rose up through the ruined halls and echoed into the open air. And in the center of the vault, Nima stood glowing, not with divine favor, not with stolen power, but with the return of what had always been hers. Memory. In truth, the Shade Ward Temple had preserved nothing but hunger. Now it preserved only silence. and even that now belonged to her.